if you would like, or you can raise your hand at the end and we will open the sound and the video if you would like to ask a question. Along with that, I will start with the introductions of our organizations. You can find the Mosaic Foundation and the Pacifica Institute on social media. Mosaic's social media URL is Mosaic MMF, and the Pacifica Institute is Pacifica Institute, basically. And the websites are mosaicfoundation.org and pacificainstitute.org. The Pacifica Institute is a California-based nonprofit established in the year 2002, and the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation was established a year later in 2003 here in the state of Colorado. The goals are very similar since we are sister organizations. The main goals are the promotion of understanding, dialogue, and peace, basically by organizing intercultural and interfaith dialogue programs. The main credo of both organizations is that we embrace everyone. We believe every human being, regardless of any attributes, views, color, and so on, is important and precious for a functioning society. When we say we organize interfaith and intercultural dialogue, people ask, what is your understanding of dialogue? For us, dialogue is learning and cooperation. It is getting together and enriching our society. And we follow the methodology that once we start dialogue, that we focus on the common points and we do not focus on the differences. Along with that, we establish mutual trust and friendships. And once we have established mutual trust and friendships, we can talk about the differences easily. Here are a few programs that we organized. We had a program about the killing of George Floyd. We had Colorado African American leaders who spoke up about that. Then we had a Ramadan event, an interfaith Ramadan event online. Then we were part of the prayer and unity of the Multi-Faith Leadership Forum. We had Dr. Nader Hashemi, who spoke about the coronavirus and what does it teach us about democracy and authoritarian regimes. Another speech about hateful rhetoric and hate crimes, what the process to that is. Mosaic Foundation also launched a first responders relief fund. So we distributed food to first responders in our community. The Mosaic Foundation and the Pacifica Institute both had community relief funds. So we collected funds and we distributed that to people in our communities in need. Here are a few photos of our speaker series, and we hope that we can get back to that sometime soon once we are over with the pandemic. We also have a program called Salam Shalom Sisterhood. This is a program where ladies, only women, they get together and they discuss issues that they are concerned about or interested in. Mosaic has also a youth program called the Congressional Award Program. It is a federal program actually that we are participating in, and the youth is leading that. Here are a few intercultural programs such as our cooking classes. We are very eager to go back to that once the pandemic is over. We also participate in social responsibility projects, and we partner with various different organizations such as the Denver Rescue Mission or the Food Bank of the Rockies. Here are a few photos of our social responsibility project efforts that we participated in. The Pacifica Institute and the Mosaic Foundation are both organizations that are part of the Hizmet, or the so-called Gülen movement. The Gülen movement's main source of inspiration is Mr. Fethullah Gülen, who lives in Pennsylvania in the United States. He is a thinker, intellectual, and Islamic scholar, education and peace activist, and he himself sees three big issues in humanity, which are ignorance, poverty, and disunity. And he suggests three solutions to those, which are universal education for all, charity work, and interfaith and intercultural dialogue. Mr. Gülen was one of the first scholars, Islamic scholars, who condemned the acts of 9/11 in public. He gave several ads to Western news outlets, and he said a Muslim cannot be a terrorist and a terrorist cannot be a Muslim. He also condemned the acts of ISIS publicly in the recent years. And Mr. Gulen suggests that Islam is compatible with democracy. He believes in democracy as the most viable system of governance. Here are a few values that our organizations believe in, and the Hizmet movement as well. We believe in social justice, equal opportunity, democracy, empowering women, freedoms, education, social harmony, peace, health and well-being, and serving fellow human beings. This is our upcoming event of the Mosaic Foundation on September 3rd. Diane and Seiji Atsuka are going to be talking about COVID-19, about the virus, what we know and what we have yet to learn about the virus. Along with that, I will give over to my friend and moderator, Fatih Atesh. He is the director of Northern California branch of the Pacifica Institute and board member at San Francisco Interfaith Council.
Ismail, brother, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So hello, everyone. Shalom from California, and salam, peace and blessings upon all of us. So as you may aware that California is suffering more than 300 wildfires, as well as we are in the middle of the pandemic. So we pray for all those affected in the latest Northern California fires as they seek safe refuge, and we pray for all firefighters and first responders for the safety. Well, it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Craig Considine, a scholar, professor, global speaker, media contributor, and public intellectual based at the Department of Sociology at Rice University. He is the author of many books and articles. He holds a PhD from Trinity College, University of Dublin, and bachelor from American University in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Dr. Considine. It is wonderful to have you and all of you in the first day of the new year in the Hijri and the Islamic calendar. We didn't actually plan that, but it's a great day to start to New Year in Islamic calendar. It marks to migration of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So Happy New Year, who is celebrating. I would like to start to saying that I'm quite impressed your book, Dr. Considine, and your intellectual work. Thank you for that. In your book, you show how the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, embraced religious pluralism, envisioned a civic nation, stood for anti-racism, advocated for seeking knowledge, initiated women's rights, and followed the Golden Rule. So what makes an American Catholic of Irish and Italian descent one of the leading global voices in admiration of Prophet Muhammad?
Thank you, Fatih. Thank you, Ishmael. Thank you, everyone, for joining this evening, wherever you are, and definitely prayers up for those impacted by the fires in California. That's very scary, and hopefully prayers are answered and that problem goes away soon. You know, Fatih, your question, you know, what makes me speak out or speak up about Muhammad and also write about him, because that's primarily what I do. I write, this is my 6th book now, and it's really hard to give a simple answer to that. I try to explain to readers in this book how I kind of got from point A to point B. And let's say point B is today. And for me, it really did start on 9/11. And I didn't know it at the time, but in 2001, I was 16 years old. I was a sophomore at Needham High School in Massachusetts. And I talk about this in the book. And long story short, I really did not have the knowledge to make proper sense of what happened on that day. So to give you a bit of a backdrop, Needham, Massachusetts has about 31,000 people. It's about 15 minutes outside of kind of downtown Boston. The town is still relatively homogenous, though it got a little bit more diverse. Very liberal education, by the way, but quite homogenous. And it was largely white, about 98% white and about 98% Christian, right? So when 9/11 happened, there were maybe one or two Muslims in freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior classes. So I had no context. When I graduated high school, I didn't write about this in the book, but like I actually went to college to play basketball, and that didn't work out. And in 2003, when I was a freshman, the invasion of Iraq happened. And I was a freshman in college trying to figure out what I wanted to study. Originally, it was sports management, and then it moves to politics, international relations, because we heard this clash of civilizations theory all over the political spectrum, all over the media. And again, I had no context to make sense of these things. And I decided to transfer to American University in Washington, D.C. I wanted to learn Arabic, and I wanted to enter either into the intelligence community or like the foreign service, basically kind of an international person. So I enroll into a class called Islam 101, essentially with Professor Akbar Ahmed of American University. And on the first day of class, he really emphasized the importance that Muhammad emphasized on knowledge, the emphasis that he placed on knowledge. And to me, that really kind of shook me to my core. It really challenged me as someone that came into a certain situation with an impression. But then it also sparked my curiosity. There was something about Professor Ahmed that I really trusted. And I was like, this is a good man. And he happens to be Muslim. And he's talking about all of these things I have no idea about, but it seems really important. So I studied under him, you know, almost like Plato studies under Socrates type thing. You know, I was trying to be in his wing, try to travel with him, learn from him. And, you know, I had the pleasure of going around this country with him for a year on a project called Journey into America. He ended up writing a book, which I helped him with, and we actually made a documentary, which you can find on YouTube, called Journey into America. And this is all these experiences are pushing me even more to keep learning, keep experiencing, keep traveling. Fast forward to 2013, when I was in Dublin, Ireland, and John Andrew Morrow, who I quote many times in this book, wrote the Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world, which were a set of treaties that Muhammad had reportedly entered with Christians that I had no idea about. And it actually wasn't until 2013, thanks to John Andrew Morrow, that sparked my interest in Muhammad. Because before it was like Islamic studies, and it was the clash of civilizations, and it was combating Islamophobia and all this. Then it was a completely new terrain. You know, who was Muhammad? And then when I learned that he was interacting with Christians, I thought to myself, as someone who admires him and as someone of Christian faith, it's actually really important to figure out what happened. How did he interact with the Christians of his time? What did he say to them? What did he say about Christianity? So I kind of became really passionate about it, and I studied it, and voila, we have a book. So I'll go through 3 chapters. I can't do everything because then it'll be too quick, but I want to do the first 3 chapters, which are, as Fatih mentioned, we have religious pluralism, and then we have civic nation building and anti-racism. So these are the 3 categories, themes, if you like to call it that. And obviously I approach these in a scholarly manner, but you got to remember too, like I am a Christian, and to see people that hold my faith, obviously quite a long time ago, to see them treated in a certain way by the leader of another faith community, though I think they're quite close, was really remarkable to me. So religious pluralism, this chapter first distinguishes, and this is kind of a point that I hit home, distinguishes tolerance and pluralism. I write in the book that Muhammad did not merely tolerate Christians. We know Jesus did not necessarily merely tolerate people. He was embracing them, no matter their condition. And I saw Muhammad in a similar way, not just with Christians, but with everyone. I learned kind of a side point here in writing a new book, which I won't talk about today, but I just recently learned about the people of the bench, which was a small community that used to visit the Prophet's mosque in Medina. And they were people of really low class, low status. And they would show up to the masjid, and there was a bench that they would kind of socialize around. Martin Lings writes about this in his great biography of Muhammad. Let me not get sidetracked though. Pluralism. Pluralism pushes us as human beings to not merely have this superficial embrace of people. Pluralism is pushing us to really understand one another at a deeper level, which happens by means of dialogue, of interaction, of disagreeing, of welcoming the other into your homes, your places of worship. And we have multiple examples in which Muhammad is engaging in pluralism, not mere tolerance. And the example that I give in the book that I focus primarily on is the interaction that he had in around 630 with the Christians of Najran. So the history of Christians in actually quite fascinating. It goes back to probably the 5th century. It was a leading center of Christianity on the peninsula at the time. Muhammad certainly knew of them for quite some time. A person that had knowledge of what was happening in. And around 630, Muhammad is sending out basically letters to leaders in the region, and he's explaining to them what his mission is, what Islam is, what he's hoping to achieve. And the Christians of Najran ended up accepting an invitation from Muhammad, this kind of hospitable and warm invitation. And the Christians of Najran not only enter into Masjid al-Nabawi, but they engage in dialogue, disagreeing here, agreeing there, healthy things that normal human beings do, speaking in a civil manner. But the pluralism, that's merely tolerance right there, being able to say, okay, you can say what you want to say, I'm going to tolerate it. But the pluralism kicks in when the Christians of Najran sought to leave the masjid to pray. And Muhammad actually, in many scholars of the Sirah mention this. They say that Muhammad actually kind of stopped them in their tracks and said, you're in a house of God, you can pray here. Now that is an extraordinary move. 630 he did that. How many communities today would be willing to do that? Not just Muslims. It's not even pointing the finger at Muslims. Like, would Christians be able to welcome people into their space? As a Christian and as a lover of Jesus, I know Jesus would do that. But Christians may not necessarily do that. We have a great example a couple years ago in Washington, D.C. at the National Cathedral, which is arguably one of the biggest and most important centers of Christianity in this country. And we had the local priest there actually invite Muslims into the space. This was when the Islamophobia during the 2016 campaign was like at a, skyrocketing. And the Christian priest allowed them to pray in the mosque, in the church, which is amazing. That's 2014, and Muhammad did it in 630. Just an amazing, it's a courageous move, I think, what Muhammad did, because I also imagine that some of his companions at the time were saying, wow, this is a pretty bold move. They may have been surprised that Muhammad was doing that, but he respected them. He knew it was a hospitable move, and it's a beautiful act, and one that, I try to live as a Christian as well, being warm, being welcoming, making sure that people feel like they can be themselves in a given place. So that's the pluralism. He didn't merely tolerate people, and neither did Jesus, for that matter. The second theme I want to focus on is the civic nation. So in the context of American society, when we think of a civic nation, we think of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which are ideals. And I make this very clear. These are ideals. We know, if you're aware of American history, there have been some dark moments, as all nations have. There were points in time where we blatantly disregarded the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All human beings are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. You know, anyone can be an American according to that definition. And a civic nation is a nation in which all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, culture, religion, can belong. Because what makes you belong to a nation is not how you look or what you believe. It's the laws. It's the Constitution. It's the separation of church and state, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And again, that's an ideal. That's, as an American citizen, that's the ideal that I want America to live up to. You know, this ideally egalitarian and democratic society in which race really doesn't matter, but we know it does. Now, when we go to 622, the second Hijrah, when Muhammad and the believers are moving northward to, which was then Yathrib, and Muhammad was there to be mediator. They needed someone to settle feuds, tribal feuds. And Muhammad, being known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, he was the best candidate. He was the statesman. He was the politician. He was the diplomat. He went in to kind of clean it up. And they create the Constitution of Medina, which in 622 is not, obviously the language is different from the 18th century language that the founding fathers used, but it was similar. It was a confederation. It was a republic of kind of smaller groups that were fundamentally different, had different religions, different ethnicities as well, but they came together for the common good. They came together to be mutually dependent upon one another. So what impacts the Nadir tribe, which happened to be Jewish, is going to impact the other tribes and the believers from Mecca. And I think that, less as a Christian, obviously there's a Christian spirit to that, but as an American citizen, learning about the Constitution of Medina really made me think even more deeply about what Muhammad was on about in the 7th century, because he was doing things that didn't happen on this soil for a long time after, which brings me to the final theme, which is anti-racism, which is obviously quite important in light of recent current events. Anti-racism as a sociologist is a term that I've been writing about for 5 years. I think the first time I wrote about it was for the Huffington Post in 2014. And then when I saw it go mainstream and now it's everywhere, I said, okay, we're making progress here. But Muhammad, just as he didn't tolerate people of other faiths, he engaged in pluralism. He was also not merely non-racist. He was anti-racist, and there's a difference, right? So a non-racist is someone, maybe in your family, let's just use a hypothetical situation. Say it's your mother or father, and they believe in human equality. They don't think that race is a determinant of people's capabilities, right? That's not racist. But like maybe your relative or your mother or whoever it is, they're not actively trying to dismantle the racism or trying to stop the reproduction of the racism. Muhammad, we know, was not merely non-racist, but he was actually making real changes in society that fundamentally altered how people saw race. And that is how I view Jesus as well. I mean, Jesus when he was alive, he was embracing the outsiders, the extreme outsiders, the people that no one wanted to deal with. Muhammad was doing something similar. He was with Bilal ibn Rabah, we know, the Abyssinian slave who was being tortured on the streets of Mecca. Muhammad said, obviously this isn't right, but I'm actually I'm going to free you. I mean, think about that. And Muhammad worked with Abu Bakr to buy the freedom of Bilal ibn Rabah, who happened to have darker skin. He was from Africa, right? That is a revolutionary move. That may not seem out of the norm today, kind of people taking a stand for others, but if you place it in the context in which Muhammad was operating in the 7th century, that was revolutionary to fundamentally challenge society that way. And then, we know Bilal rises up the kind of social hierarchy, if you want to call it that, becomes a very respected companion. He becomes the muezzin. When they return to Mecca, he gives the call to prayer, really honorable positions. And then think of this, and I'll wrap up here. Some of the last words that Muhammad provided to the Ummah, his last big speech at the farewell sermon in 632, one of the things that he stressed the most was the famous words, which, I'm not going to repeat entirety, but an Arab's not better than a non-Arab, a black person's not better than non-black, white's not better than non-white, and so on and so forth, except in piety and good action. Now, to make another bridge back to America, in 1963, the great Christian American leader, Martin Luther King Jr., literally said the same exact thing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when he gave his I Have a Dream speech, an iconic American moment where he said, I do not want my children to be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I mean, these are just, it's almost, I tell audiences all the time, I'm like, if anyone can ever find out if Martin Luther King was inspired by the farewell sermon, that would be a great little piece of data. But I can't find a source on that. But these are amazing, simple examples. I just gave you three or four stories, which not only bridge the divide between Christians and Muslims, but it can bridge the divide between civilizations, Islamic civilization, Western civilization. It can bridge the gap between Muslim majority countries and the United States. And it's one of these things I think as well, I could sit here and I could lecture you on everything that's gone wrong between these parties too. But I think we as people of conscience have a choice. We can focus on the stories that are constructive, that are potentially bringing people together, or we can focus on the stuff that divides us. This is an ultimate challenge. And one of the verses of the Quran that I respect and love is, we made you into nations and tribes so you can get to know one another. That is that's God's challenge to us. We're part of his creation, and he said, no way I'm going to make you all alike. I'm going to stir up the pot a little bit. And that's what makes you human. Finding ways and having the ability to transcend these differences, to reach a different state of being human, as Muhammad did. He pushed his community way beyond probably his wildest imagination, hence the title of the book, Humanity of Muhammad. So that's about 20 minutes there. Happy to talk about whatever I just said, but also the other chapters of the book, and happy to speak about really anything for that matter.
Great, thank you very much. So first, I'm glad you choose this way instead of basketball. I'm so glad that. I was just reading your Twitter in a couple days ago. I think you were saying that I think the pluralism is greater than the tolerance.
Yeah.
Anti-racism is greater than non-racism. I think that's a great point as well. First, I would like to actually ask, who is the audience of this book? Is this Christians or Muslims, or in general? Who do you intend it to in the first?
Thank you. That's a good question. I try to write all my books for everyone. I know that might sound cliche, but like I try to write in a way and structure my books in a way and to provide content in a way that anyone can find themselves in this book. You know, like that's why I like to write about humanity. I like to write about human stories. You know, like what I write about in the Pluralism chapter of, you know, Muhammad, you know, going out of his way to make a religious minority community feel comfortable and safe. You know, like that's not unique to Christians and Muslims. It's unique to everyone. So really, I've cast a big tent here. I really want all people to read it, of all ages as well, of all faith backgrounds. In terms of, you know, specific Christian Muslim communities, I write about this at the very beginning of the book. I think the book will really be a success if it's able to reach the hearts and minds of Christians, because Christians know less about Muhammad than Muslims do. Now, with that said, like, I do think Muslims could benefit from it too. Yeah, I mean, because what I do is like I put a sociological spin on the stories that we have that are readily available about Muhammad. Not a lot of scholars are doing that. Also, I think, you know, being a kind of an outsider as a Christian, like, you know, maybe I see him differently in a way that other people who happen to be Muslim may not have seen it before. And I also, I think Muslims could benefit from it as well, because I focus on current events too. You know, I'm focusing on things that the Muslim community has been passionate about lately. Things like anti-racism, things like building a civic nation. So, you know, I think it has a wide audience, I'd say.
Wonderful. So the one point actually, it was I benefited. For example, one of the point I benefited from your book, you talk about why there is no Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. You're saying that. So tell me more about this. What makes you feel that in this way?
Yeah, it's just such a silly omittance. It just seems like such an obvious error, you know, because like the Quran is so explicit in saying like we are a continuation, if you want to put it that way. You know, like the Quran basically says we believe in what was given before, and what was given before was started with the Jews. Jesus comes, the Christian movement begins, and Muhammad is basically saying, you know, I'm coming to be on top, if I could put it in a very kind of simple manner. So Abraham is one of the figures that unites the faiths. And in recent research that I've been carrying out, so is Angel Gabriel, and many other people, Ishmael as well, Abraham's son. So we have these figures who really travel across the three faiths, and they could be a uniting figure of the three faiths. So yeah, it's, you know, another thing too, historical context, you know, to suggest that Western civilization and Christendom emerged in a vacuum without the influence of Islam is also just historically incorrect. I write about this in the book. I call it historical amnesia, when Westerners and Christians are unaware or are aware, and they dismiss it, of the immense contributions that Muslims have made to human civilization, to Europe, especially Spain, and obviously the Renaissance and the saving of Greek literature and all these things. I write about this in the longest chapter in the book, chapter 4, Seeking Knowledge. You know, so to say that, you know, Islam is not part of this Judeo-Christian tradition, and to even say that Islam is not part of Western civilization, I don't even agree with that. Islam is part of Western civilization. I mean, that's a historical fact. So I think we just need to do a better job of finding these moments in history, these stories, and bringing them to the surface and say, look what people did side by side in harmony with one another.
Actually, there's one contribution question or by Stephanie. Weren't there societies where Islam, Judaism, and Christianity lived together peacefully and learned from one another? Al-Andalus or Constantinople come to mind.
Absolutely. Those are two great examples. And actually, the book has a section in chapter 4, Seeking Knowledge, and I call it the other Al-Andalus, which was Sicily. And I focus primarily on the city of Palermo, which, by the way, that's where my ancestors are from, southern Italy, which is a whole nother ballgame to get into DNA. And I actually have like a small bit of North African DNA. But Sicily, Palermo, one of these moments in history where you have Arab people, the Islamic faith, Christian people, Greek people, Norman people, and the Lombards of Italy. You had, and the Byzantines, you had all of these little civilizations coming together, finding a way to coexist. They fought some wars that got ugly, but like when things settled and they were moving forward, they created a very civic-oriented society. And we had two leaders, Byzantine Christian leaders, Frederick and Roger. This is like 12th and 13th century. And they say Roger and Frederick were speaking Arabic. That Arabic was one of the kind of official languages of the court at the time. And of course, too, like in a modern context, like let's not forget, like these, moments in history where people of all different backgrounds are coming together, living peacefully. I mean, that happens here in America. I know things are not rosy at the moment and things can be tough, but like, think about what we're doing tonight. People of all different backgrounds coming together. I mean, in normal non-COVID times, having big interfaith events at churches or mosques, the legacy is not dead by any means. I think we just get weighed down by the doom and gloom and the struggle that we see around us, unfortunately.
Actually, it's a great point, because all of our dialogue events, I know the Mosaic as well, comes with food. We break the bread together. I always say we break the baklava together. So we enjoy together. So
and food, let me just add to this. And I'm so glad you brought up something so simple yet so profound. Food. Mm-hmm. When you share food, it's like a lost art. It really is, to just sit down with strangers at a table and then just to talk. And I often say to audiences, like with interfaith dialogue, like instead of jumping right to the thorny questions about our faiths and the controversial topics, let's just share food. Let's talk about how was your day? What is it like to be a father, a mother, an employee? What is it like? Just break it down and leave all the heavy stuff out, because you need to develop trust with people first before you get into passages of the Quran or the Bible. I mean, you need to develop trust with people first. Sorry to interrupt you, Fatih.
No, it's great point, actually. It's our motto, Craig, is turning walls into the tables. That's our motto.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, that's great.
We don't need more walls anymore. So we need more tables and stuff.
Turning walls into tables. That's great. Yeah. That's great.
So I want to follow up this dialogue of civilizations concept. You argue, you talk about this, my intention to argue in this book, that the dialogue of civilization has strong roots in the history of Christianity and the Muslim relations. You mentioned about the Najran Christians who visit the Prophet and his companions and their pluralism. And as well as to the Prophet Muhammad sending some of the companions to Abyssinia, actually, for the protection as well. So I know the people from the Islamic world in this day is actually coming to the West for seeking, to home, let's say. So what do you say about these strong roots in the history of Christian and the Muslim relations?
So yeah, you really can't understand the history of Prophet Muhammad, and you can't understand the history of Christianity in the 5th and 6th and 7th century without understanding that dialogue has always been a part of this exchange between Islam and Christianity, if I want to put it that way. You know, I didn't write about this in the book, but I will share it because I think it's interesting. And it provides, again, with singular stories and people in time that we can remember. When Muhammad was like 9 years old, some sources say that he may have been 12. He was with his uncle, Talib, and they were traveling to Damascus. And on the way back from Damascus to Mecca, they stopped in Busra, which was a Christian Byzantine city. And Muhammad is reported to have had a interaction and a dialogue with Bahira, the monk, which I think some scholars probably say he was a Nestorian and so on and so forth. But they are reported to have discussed religion, broadly speaking, at a very kind of high-end level. And I think that's probably the first known story that we know of Muhammad entering into dialogue with a person who is seemingly from a different civilization, and they were exchanging ideas. But you know, this dialogue of civilizations, like if we can place ourselves in Muhammad's shoes when he was like 25, 595, he just marries Khadija, right? And at this time, he's a successful merchant. Like, he was traveling all over the place to a bunch of different cities: Gaza, Jerusalem, Damascus, Busra, Petra, and then even south. And this was not a homogenous society. You know, the Byzantines and the Persians were to the west and east, respectively. Lots of different people, goods, languages, traditions, culture. You know, so to say that, I mean, what I would say this, Fatih, is the dialogue of civilizations is inherent. It's inherent in Muhammad's experience, in his life. And then we can, you know, digging into Christian history in that area in the 6th and 7th century is also a very, very interesting subject, which is my next book, but that's not why we're here.
We're waiting.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's next year, about this time.
All right. So the interesting, another story, actually, I'm sure you might be aware that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he received the first revelation from the angel Gabriel, so, and he and Khadija, his beloved wife, they go to a Christian person, and that person is actually saying, "Oh, Muhammad, you know, Bashiran, you know, you are the one, you know, you receive whatever the Moses received. You receive whatever, right? I mean, that's another."
Absolutely, Waraq ibn Nafal, and like put it this way, Fatih, that was 610, right? That experience was said to happen in 610. But we also do know that Waraka was Khadija's uncle, and when Muhammad and Khadija got married, it's pretty certain that Waraka was at the wedding, which was 15 years earlier. And like, there's not a lot written about whether Muhammad engaged in a lot of conversations with Waraka, but again, talking about this dialogue of civilizations, I think they were probably talking about really deep stuff, because Waraka was the only Christian. He had hardly anyone to talk about these things with.
Correct.
And Muhammad was, you know, he's the prophet. He came with a message that Waraka was like, yo, I know what you're talking about. You're onto something. I mean, so yeah, I mean, again, these are such simple stories that really serve as a buster. It's like you're busting through a wall that people want to build, and they want to say, no, like, this dialogue didn't happen. It hasn't always been good. And then we have these stories that say, yes, they do. They did happen.
Well, wonderful. So do we have anyone to directly ask a question to Craig? Or, I mean, I'm really enjoying to speak with the Craig, of course, but if anyone, please just raise your hand or just, you know, unmute yourself. And if anyone, if you like it, to ask a question directly to our author. Okay, so I think I got one question from Sarah. Is there any kind of momentum in the study of world religions at US universities to emphasize the idea of communication and dialogue between Christianity and Islam?
Yes, there's a lot. A lot of universities around the country have Islamic studies centers that focus on Christian-Muslim relations. There's also, burgeoning Islamic institutes like Zaytuna College, I know, does a lot of interfaith activity out in California. But I think the most important is unfolding at Harvard with the Pluralism Project, which was created by Diana Eck. And really, they're just documenting the religious diversity in the United States, trying to make knowledge available, and then encouraging people to get active within their communities. And also, what I believe it's the Pluralism Project. This is definitely happening at Harvard, but there's also something else happening there. It's about religious literacy. So, to effectively enter into dialogue with people, you need to know what you're talking about. And Harvard is really emphasizing, it might be the religious studies department, really focusing this concept of religious literacy. So being knowledgeable about certain subjects, and this is something that is so important. Like I didn't know anything about Islam, literally nothing until I was 19, nothing. And I grew up in the suburbs of Boston in a pretty liberal place. And think about how many Americans are there in this country who are even further away from that, So we really, I think we need to do a better job of keeping it simple too. Like we're too quick to go into the Quran, how did Muhammad treat Jewish people? It's like, okay, there's a lot of historical context that needs to be interpreted here, but why don't we just break it down? Al-Kitab, people of the book. Let's talk about the reverence that the Quran has for Moses, for Abraham, for David. We really need to teach the basics. That's the key.
Well, I was planning to ask you one more question. I think this is maybe it's an appropriate time to ask. You mentioned in your book, actually, to understanding the Islam or understanding the text, let's say, you argue in your book, Craig, Islamophobics and the so-called Islamic groups like Daesh and Al-Qaeda, you say that they use the similar methods to read the text. Tell me about more, please.
Yeah, two sides of the same coin. That's the phrase that I like to use. And yeah, it's like a mind-blowing and at the same time remarkable social phenomenon that, you have Muslims who like to use certain verses of the Quran to exclude people, to oppress people, to use violence against people. And then you have the people who hate or distrust Muslims literally looking at the same verses of the Quran and saying, this is why we don't like Muslims. So it's like you have two enemies who are basically using the same type of interpretation, the same type of knowledge base to judge their view on an entire faith. And that's kind of scary if you think about it, when so-called Islamophobes, who I'm unfortunately familiar with, especially some of them who are very active on social media, like when something happens violently somewhere in a Muslim majority country, some of these anti-Muslim individuals will be like, well, this happened because this verse of the Quran said this. Right? And then you're just like, okay, well, that's really simplistic. And then 2 days later, some random social media account that is run by the people who carried out the attack, who happen to be Muslim, are using the same verse and saying, this is why we did it. I mean, they feed into each other. It's like fear, anger, and hate they just fuel each other. And unfortunately, where all of us kind of like sane people are the majority, the overwhelming majority of people. But unfortunately, our message of peace, of love, of social harmony, of understanding and justice, these things don't bleed. And we know with the media, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So when there's war, we hear about it. When a Islamophobe says something absolutely ridiculous about Islam, we hear about it. One example, to put it into contemporary context, in Florida, I don't know what district it is, but Laura Loomer, I don't know if you know who Laura Loomer is, but she was banned from Twitter in 2018, a very passionate Islamophobe. And she's been all over the news because she won her primary. So she's running for a seat in the House of Representatives. And she's getting all this airtime. And unfortunately, all these people need to hear what she has to say about the faith of a quarter of the world's population. And these things aren't nice. So unfortunately, the sanity is pushed aside, and we need to do a better job of fighting the extremes, closing that gap, because the extremes are really dominating.
Thank you, Craig. So I have one more question from Philip Powell. And I have a question. Hello, Craig. We studied together.
Phil? Yeah. What's up, Phil? Phil, we haven't seen each other in 12 years.
Okay, Phil, I mean, if you would like to ask your question directly, and welcome to do that, or I can read it. Okay, let me read it. So I wonder if you would comment on the humanity of Muhammad as it relates to proper place of coercion, use of legitimate violence. Jesus seems to be different in rejecting violence. Some Christians use this to dismiss the prophet. Any thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, it's complicated, Phil, and I would say this. There are times where I do compare Jesus and Muhammad at a very macro essentialist level, and then there are other times I'm thinking they're two pretty different people. Jesus had his own mission, and Muhammad had his own. Muhammad was not merely a prophet; he was also a statesperson, a general, a diplomat, and he was in charge of defending the very livelihood, the very lives of his community. Whereas with Jesus's life and Jesus's legacy, when he was here, I don't think the persecution was as strong of his followers, of his community. So like the use of violence needs to be handled very carefully and in context. And I just spent all summer reading about the battles that Muhammad had entered with largely the Quraysh, his enemies. And I think there is a substantial amount of evidence to suggest that he was really not the aggressor. I think that's a safe bet. Now, in terms of the conversion, I think the number one story or example that sticks out to me more than any is when the Muhammad and the believers, the Ummah, returned to Mecca, and they had a peaceful, triumphant return. And Muhammad could have easily taken revenge and persecuted his enemies that killed his loved ones, that persecuted his people. And he showed mercy. He said, I'm not going to take revenge, and I'm also not going to force you to convert. He said nothing about forcing them to convert either. Now, eventually, I think naturally they kind of did, because the force was kind of so overwhelming. But I'll say this, Phil, like, again, going back to my point about stories, like, could we find something in the Quran as well in a different context in which this outcome that I just presented is not the outcome, that there's a different one? Probably. But why don't we focus on these positive stories and try to follow his example in light of these positive stories too? I think we need to be wise with the examples that we choose and the examples that we follow.
Thank you, Craig. So I have one more question, and also I was planning to ask you something about Muhammad's teaching about women and the women's right. And so the Katie from audience, she was saying that I have heard an amazing homily on Mary, the mother of Jesus, from a Muslim at an interfaith service. Is the Islamic view of Mary addressed in the book? I'm not aware of it, Craig. Is that?
Sorry, is she addressed in the book?
Yes.
Is Mary addressed in the
Yes.
Quran? Yes.
No. I think in the book she refers your book.
In this book.
Yeah.
I think only briefly, only in passing. I think when I talk about the reverence that the Quran has for Jesus, I also mentioned the reverence that the Quran has for Mary, and the fact that Mary is the only woman in the Quran with her own surah, with her own chapter. And actually, the Quran does a better job of speaking about Mary than the Bible does, which is interesting. But that's just the way it goes. I would have liked the Bible to have a lot more information about not only Jesus's mother, but also Mary Magdalene. If you know your history about the Catholic Church and the political games that were played out to potentially suppress Mary Magdalene and the prominent role that she had played among the disciples, the place of women in religious texts, I think we all know is a point of contention. But again, like the war thing, it really needs to be dealt with sensitively. And I think big picture, when we talk about women in the Islamic tradition, and I dedicate a book to it, a chapter in the book to it, again, a big picture thing. So Khadija, being 15 years older than Muhammad, Khadija's his first wife. She asks him for his hand in marriage. Like what man would not have the utmost respect for that type of woman? I just think we have some of these obvious cases, and we also know that he had a significant impact on his daughters, positive impact as well. So, I think I return to this scenario again, focusing on these cases, these stories that can uplift our humanity. These are the stories that we need to focus on.
Craig, actually, one time I've been invited to Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco to talk about the Jesus' miraculous birth in the Christmas Eve service, because we found many details actually in the Holy Quran. That's why I've been invited to talk about, actually.
And this is where Gabriel comes back, because the Quran also mentions Zechariah.
Correct.
In the birth of John the Baptist.
Correct.
So Gabriel is another fascinating figure that travels like Mary, like Abraham, like Moses. The Abrahamic tradition. And we need a better term for, it's obviously more than Judeo-Christian, but Judeo-Christian Islamic also sounds difficult. So Abrahamic, I think, fits.
Abrahamic, yes. Yeah. So I want to follow up actually the what you just said, the Khadija, the beloved wife of the Prophet, and Aisha as well, and as well as the Prophet Muhammad daughters and wives actually shape his life during his years and shape the establishment of Islam. You talk about this in your book. So what is the role of the women's in Islam or Prophet Muhammad's life?
I don't think he put any barrier or really kind of expectation in a way. I think, and I kind of write about this in my Newsweek article, which is separate from the book, but I wrote a Newsweek article on COVID and how Muhammad took a very like rational approach to things. And I think this does apply to his views on women as well. And I think there's a hadith that's related about Aisha, and don't necessarily quote me on this, but it's Aisha was having a conversation with someone and Muhammad was there. And I think he said something like, Aisha is tough, she's a tough cookie. She doesn't take any nonsense. And like, if you want to get into it with her, just be ready. And I think he was acutely aware of people's capabilities, of people's God-given talents. And I don't think he was someone who said, oh, you're a woman? Okay, like this is your fate. I do think he was expecting certain norms, certain roles, yes. But I don't think he was saying, well, this is as high as a woman could go in society. I don't think he was saying that. Because he did the same thing with race, with Bilal ibn Rabah. He was basically saying, no, like you have, by the grace of God, by God's will, you're a good person. And we're not going to discriminate you because you look a certain way. And I think he didn't just do that with race. He did that with everyone. That's the humanity of it. So why would he exclude women? If they, there's even historical sources that talk about women going to battlefields. Like when the believers' army was, struggling to survive and Muhammad was on the battlefield, there's Martin Lings writes about this in his biography of Muhammad, that there were women on the battlefield too. So, there's just so many stories, big picture things that we can kind of turn to. And, I am an essentialist in a way. Like I like to essentialize, religious traditions, really complicated matters. But Muhammad was a revolutionary for women's rights at the time. Absolutely revolutionary. Like we can't take every example and line it up today and say, well, how does that line up today? But he ended the killing of little girls who were babies that weren't welcomed. He allowed women to like divorce, to like own property. And then you think of Khadija, his first wife, was like one of the wealthiest people in Mecca. So I think that's enough evidence right there. To me, it's obvious.
Thank you. So the other question I was planning to ask, and also I got a question from Katie as well about this being an anti-racist in the light of in the recent months, let's say. How in this moment of possibility and hope for anti-racists, how do you see the role of Muslims and the Christians in collaboration?
Well, I've actually been thinking a little bit about that. I don't think religion is necessary for a successful movement like Black Lives Matter. But there's something that I do feel is missing from it. Like Martin Luther King, for me, he had the ability to make it about something that was like not in front of us. It was a bigger picture. It was God. It was humanity. It was human equality, which obviously my interpretation of Black Lives Matter is. It is about that. But like a lot of these movements, like we're so focused on, rights, getting your rights, obviously quite important. But like the way Martin Luther King put a spin on it, it was challenging us to reach a higher plane, to reach a higher state. So I would like to see more Christians and Muslims involved in this movement. I've seen actually some Christian leaders from Texas to get involved, I think for some of them for the first time in their lives. So I want to see more faith in it, to be honest. I think there's something missing from it. It's these movements are hyper political too, very, very bipartisan. And I just think there's something missing. I think we need to hit a different plane, which is humanity, not necessarily the identity politics, but really pushing us to see each other as human first and foremost.
Wonderful. Actually, I want to quote at this point to the Fethullah Gulen. The Muhammad Fethullah Gulen is the person who we inspired as Pacifica Institute and the Hizmet movement, in general speaking. And when he talk about the dialogue, and he always encourages and telling us and teaching us, we are the human being first. Being a Muslim, being an American, being an Irish, whatever, being a human being first, human being first. If you accept this and if you really understand this concept, I think that you can be in dialogue with everyone, regardless of faith or skin color or gender or the many things. So I have one other question, Craig. I think we can wrap up in 5 or 7 minutes, right, Ismail? From Vedi, he's asking, what makes you most curious about the Holy Quran?
These days, because I just spent a good part of the lockdown engaging with it. I think, one thing that I find challenging is, the fact that sometimes the Quran jumps around, like historically. So like you need to understand the historical context in which these revelations, these verses were presented. What was happening when Muhammad was receiving them at the time? So like the historical context in which they were revealed, I find to be very, very important, and really having a full understanding of the Islamic Holy Book. And I also think to have this historical understanding, to know the social context in which these revelations were given to Muhammad, to understand that can also help combat some popular Islamophobic narratives. So when the Quran, for example, talks Jews, there's plenty of verses about Jews, but like say something particularly fond of Jews, does the person who's reading that verse understand what was happening at that time when that verse was revealed? If you don't understand what was happening at that time and you just read it literally, then you may walk away with a negative view, a false understanding. So the Quran is complex, and I don't mean that as a state by any stretch, but it is linear to me as the New Testament. The New Testament is follow. I find it kind of there's more details about the history and the context, whereas the Quran, it doesn't necessarily mention that this was happening in Medina. Like, this is why everything fell apart in Medina. It doesn't necessarily, or at least it's not obvious that it says that. So I find that, I'm sorry, that's not very interesting, but I mean, that's 5 months of research and reading the Quran. That's like my initial observation.
Thank you. I want to close, if you don't have anything more, Ismail, you talk about the Pluralism project at the Harvard University, and you gave great details about the project and how religious pluralism requires or containing the 4 primary elements you mentioned in your book. I really enjoy and I really like that. And those 4 elements is mostly to talk about energetic engagement and actively seeking an understanding of the practices and the beliefs of the people from the other religions. So I think what you mentioned earlier, when we say the Christian-Muslim dialogue or Abrahamic dialogue or faith and non-faith people, right? If we would like to be in the dialogue, and I think the first coming together and to talk about we like the golden rule, right? Love your neighbor, right? Come together, learn from each other, and to talk about probably your kids and your neighbor's kids going to the same school, right? You probably have the similar issues, right? And then what I call is the safe zone. You know, once you have that relationship and those friendship, let's say, and then you can go and talk about more controversial issues, let's say. Exactly. Because we know each other, right? We know each other. Then you can ask me to your real questions in your mind, right? I mean, but we need those friendly zone, safe zone, what I call. What do you talk about? What do you say?
I mean, I agree 100%, you know, because like if you don't trust someone, or if you don't have at least a cordial or warm impression of someone, and you're talking about like the Quran and the Bible, and they're like, the Quran doesn't say that, or the Bible doesn't say that. Like, what makes you think this person who doesn't know you, who's not your friend, who's a stranger, what makes you think they're going to believe you? Right? So like, this is kind of common sense. And I use an acronym. I don't write about this in the book, but I call it DEUCE. So DEUCE is DEUCE. It's like a peace sign, DEUCE. And this is how I activate pluralism, right? So making pluralism a process, you know, a lived experience. And it starts with dialogue for D. So breaking bread together, not necessarily talking about complex things yet, build rapport, build trust. Once you create that and reach that state, then you can start educating one another. The E is for education, right? Now, education is also quite difficult, right? Like, you can read a book, but not fully understand. You know, education requires reading books. It requires getting uncomfortable. It requires human interaction. Once you've done that and you've gone through that difficult process, then you can properly understand one another. And when you understand one another, you can disagree with one another, and you can have civil conversations with one another. And someone could say, I'm voting for this person. And then you can say, well, that's okay. I get what you're saying. I understand. The C, the fourth stage of pluralism, according to DEUCE, is the commitment. So you've broken bread, you've educated one another, you understand one another, then you can see eye to eye, and then you can commit to certain shared values, but also certain shared missions in society. So like feeding the needy, or doing like a blood drive. That's where the E comes in, the engagement, right? So the engagement doesn't just happen, you know, like if you're the leader of a masjid and you call up a church, or the opposite way, and you're like, listen, you know, we need to build a bridge. This needs to happen. It's like, okay. And you go out there and you skip all the 4 previous phases and you go right into the engagement. What makes you think that's going to be successful? You know, because people don't know one another. So like, pluralism takes time. It takes effort. It takes patience. Most of all, it takes a desire to want to improve society, to really see love, to see peace. These are hard things to achieve, and they don't happen with a snap of a finger. It takes dedication and commitment.
I see that love and that peace, all people on their face right now. There's some black, but I'm sure they are the peaceful people as well on the screen. So I want to turn to my dear friend Ismail and close the event. Dr. Craig, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatih. Pleasure.
I really enjoyed that.
Me too. Pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Dr. Craig Considine and Fatih. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed listening to you. And as a Muslim, I'm very grateful that you brought actually these beautiful stories about our role model, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to our homes during these trying times where we are locked at home. Thank you again, and we wish you the best because you're going to be starting teaching soon at Rice University. So good luck with that. And stay at home. I know it's hot in Texas. Along with that, I would like to remind you about our upcoming event on September 3rd. If you're interested, please join us. And here is actually Dr. Craig Considine's book, The Humanity of Muhammad. If you are interested, you can find the book on Amazon. Just Google it, and I think it might be the first search result on Google. The Humanity of Muhammad. It's a wonderful book. I'm still reading it as well. So thank you, Fatih, and thank you, Dr. Craig Considine. It was a wonderful evening. Take care and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you for Ismail. Thank you so much. Fatih, again, thank you. Everyone who tuned in, thank you all so much. God bless. And please say a prayer, because my wife and I, any day now, are expecting our first baby. So please send prayers and just pray. Thank you.
We will do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with that as well.
Thank you.
May God bless your family, Craig.
Thank you. God bless you guys.